A lot of Americans right now are quietly doing the math. They're looking at the rent, the groceries, the price of a dinner out, and then they're looking at photos of Lisbon, or Barcelona, or some apartment in Rome with a terrace and a view that costs less per month than a studio in Phoenix. And they're wondering if they've been doing this wrong. But here's what almost nobody is saying out loud. You might not have to leave the country at all. I went through real cost of living data, not surveys, not vibes, actual number indices and census figures, to find US cities where your money genuinely goes further than it does in the European destinations Americans dream about. Not further than London or Zurich, further than Lisbon, further than Barcelona. Cities that people are actually moving to right now, treating as the new Portugal, but without the visa, the time zone, or the language barrier. None of these places are perfect. Each one has trade-offs, but each one beats, or seriously competes with, a city millions of Americans fantasize about moving to instead. Coming up, there's a mid-sized southern city that beats Lisbon on grocery costs and matches it on rent. A mountain town in the interior west, where you can buy a home for what a down payment costs in Madrid. And one city in the south that most people have never seriously considered, that genuinely rivals Barcelona on total monthly spend while sitting inside the United States. And one of these might completely change where you picture yourself living next. Starting off at number 10 is Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville tends to get overlooked in national conversations about great American cities, and that's actually its biggest advantage. The overall cost of living here runs roughly 12 to 15% below the national average. A one-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood comes in around $800 to $900 a month. Groceries for a single person run about $250. You drive to work or walk to a trail or sit on a porch in late October, and the thought that you need to move to Portugal to afford this life starts to feel slightly absurd. The comparison to Lisbon is genuinely interesting here. Lisbon is celebrated for its affordability, and it deserves that reputation for a European city. But once you account for rent, daily expenses, and the fact that your US income still works at full strength in Knoxville, the numbers don't favor Lisbon as clearly as people assume. The trade-off in Knoxville is humidity in July, and a downtown scene that's still building rather than fully formed. But for people who want low costs, outdoor access, and actual seasons without extremes, Knoxville quietly delivers. At number 9 is Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, I know Oklahoma isn't the dream destination most people pin on their inspiration boards, but the numbers here are genuinely striking. Tulsa runs 11% below the national average on cost of living across transportation, healthcare, housing, utilities, and groceries, all of them. A one-bedroom apartment in a desirable part of the city comes in under $800 a month. Dining out is cheap enough that eating at a real restaurant multiple times a week doesn't feel like a budget decision. Paris, the European city most Americans associate with the good life, costs roughly double what daily life in Tulsa requires. Double. That gap exists not because Tulsa is deprived, but because Paris is genuinely expensive, and most people never think to run that comparison. The trade-off is honest. Tulsa lacks coastal scenery, and Oklahoma summers are real. But the Philbrook Museum of Art, the river trails, and a food scene that's been quietly improving for a decade make it a more livable city than its reputation suggests. At number 8 is Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville is one of the fastest-growing cities in the Southeast, and it's growing for reasons that make a lot of financial sense. The cost of living sits around 5 to 8% below the national average. Housing costs are well below the European comparison cities, and the city carries one of the highest concentrations of engineers and technical workers in the country, which means strong local infrastructure without the price tag of a tech hub. A one-bedroom apartment runs $700 to $900 a month. The NASA presence and defense contractor economy mean this is a city with real institutional stability, not just low costs because the economy is depressed. Compare that to Barcelona, where a one-bedroom in a reasonable neighborhood now runs 1,400 to 1,800 euros a month, after years of rental inflation. Huntsville wins that comparison by a wide margin. The trade-off is straightforward. It's not a particularly walkable city, and the cultural scene is still developing. But for people who want financial room to breathe inside the United States, Huntsville is doing something real. At number 7 is Columbus, Ohio. Columbus is the city that keeps showing up in cost of living research, precisely because it's large enough to have everything but not famous enough to have been priced out yet. Rent in desirable neighborhoods run $900 to $1,200 a month. The restaurant scene, the short North Arts District, and a genuinely active downtown mean this doesn't feel like making a compromise for affordability. It feels like a functioning city that happens to be affordable. The comparison to Naples, Italy, is instructive here. Naples is often cited as one of Europe's more affordable major cities. Groceries, nearly 30% cheaper than in comparably sized American cities. Rent, significantly lower than Rome. But Columbus actually competes on those numbers. And you don't need a visa, a foreign bank account, or to navigate Italian bureaucracy. The trade-off is Ohio winters, which are real, gray, and cold from November through March. But Columbus has figured out how to have an indoor life that doesn't feel like enduring something. We've mostly been in the South and Midwest so far, but affordable cities in the United States aren't only found there. The next few cities come from completely different regions, including a mountain city in the west that competes directly with Lisbon on monthly costs, and one coastal adjacent city that might be the single best value in the country right now. The list gets genuinely interesting from here. At number 6 is El Paso, Texas. El Paso surprises people who look at it closely. The overall cost of living sits roughly 12% below the national average. Rent for a one-bedroom runs $700 to $900 a month. Groceries are inexpensive. The sun comes out 320 days a year, and the city sits at the edge of a desert landscape that is genuinely dramatic in a way that photographs well on anyone's terms. The comparison to Lisbon is almost directly applicable here. Lisbon rents have risen significantly in recent years. A one-bedroom in a central neighborhood now runs 1,200 to 1,500 euros a month. El Paso undercuts that number. Your income doesn't get converted through an exchange rate, and you're still inside the United States healthcare, banking, and legal systems. The trade-off is that El Paso is car-dependent, and the Texas summer is serious heat. But for people who have been doing the math on Portugal and wondering if it's worth the leap, El Paso runs that same math inside the country. At number 5 is Greenville, South Carolina. Greenville has been showing up on relocation lists for a decade now, and it's still underpriced relative to what it offers. Cost of living runs about 5 to 8% below the national average. A one-bedroom in a good neighborhood lands around $900 to $1,100 a month. The downtown is walkable and genuinely pleasant. Not a simulation of downtown, an actual one, with restaurants and farmers markets and live music that fills the streets on a Friday night. The Blue Ridge Mountains sit close enough for weekend drives that take about 30 minutes. The Barcelona comparison works here in a specific way. Barcelona costs about 27% less than London, which gets cited as a reason it's affordable by European standards. But Greenville costs less than Barcelona on total monthly expenditures and significantly less on housing, while your paycheck stays in dollars and your healthcare plan keeps working. The trade-off is that Greenville is still fundamentally a mid-sized southern city. The international restaurant scene is limited. The airport is functional, but not a hub. But the quality of daily life for the cost is difficult to find anywhere in Europe. At number 4 is Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga sits in a narrow valley surrounded by mountains, and that geography produces a city that feels like it shouldn't be as affordable as it is. Rents run $900 to $1,200 a month for a one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. The outdoor access is exceptional. The Tennessee River, Lookout Mountain, and hundreds of miles of trails are part of daily life here, not vacation activities. The city invested heavily in fiber internet early, which helped attract remote workers before that was a mainstream conversation. It has the bones of a place people would pay significantly more to live in. The Portugal comparison connects directly. A one-bedroom in central Lisbon runs €1,300 to €1,500 a month. A comparable place in Chattanooga's South Side district runs less. Your income keeps its full purchasing power, and you have access to driving distance to Atlanta, Nashville, and the entire Appalachian Range. The trade-off is summer humidity. Midday in August in Chattanooga is real, but residents adapt. Earlier mornings, later evenings, and the rest of the year is genuinely pleasant. At number 3 is Boise, Idaho. Boise catches people off guard because the West is usually expensive. But Boise managed to grow significantly over the last decade while remaining meaningfully cheaper than coastal alternatives. A one-bedroom in a good part of the city runs $1,100 to $1,300 a month. The mountains are immediately accessible, with skiing, hiking, and trail running not just weekend trips but after-work activities. The food and craft beer scene developed ahead of the price curve, meaning you get quality before the premium arrives. The comparison to Lisbon or Valencia works cleanly. Valencia is often called Europe's best value city, affordable, Mediterranean, coastal. Boise does not have the Mediterranean, but it has mountain access, a downtown that functions, and costs that run close enough to Southern European averages that the comparison holds. The trade-off is that Boise summers are genuinely hot, and the city has grown fast enough that some of its affordable advantage has narrowed. Still, for Western living without a California price tag, Boise remains one of the most compelling options in the country. At number 2 is Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is one of those places where the cost of living data and the quality of life data almost don't belong in the same sentence because the gap between them is so wide. The overall cost of living runs roughly 29% below Washington, D.C. and 37% below Boston. A one-bedroom in a desirable neighborhood comes in around $1,100 to $1,300 a month. The art says scene, food culture, and mountain landscape make it a city people compare favorably to European destinations. Not because they're being generous, but because the experience genuinely holds up. The Barcelona comparison is direct here. Asheville's total monthly costs for a single person, rent, groceries, dining, transport, run meaningfully below what Barcelona demands in 2025, after that city's rental inflation of recent years. And you stay inside the American paycheck, American healthcare system, American time zone. The trade-off is that Asheville is small, around 90,000 people, and housing prices have risen as more people have discovered it. The winter weather throws occasional winter surprises due to the mountain elevation, but very few cities in the United States can match what Asheville offers at its price point. At number 1 is Medford, Oregon. This is the city the entire list has quietly been building toward, and it's the one most people have never seriously considered. Medford sits in the Rogue Valley in southern Oregon. Mountain ranges on 3 sides, a dry Mediterranean-style climate that gives it over 250 days of sunshine a year, and a total cost of living that runs roughly 15 to 20% below the national average. A one-bedroom apartment in a comfortable neighborhood lands around $900 to $1,100 a month. The outdoor access is staggering. Crater Lake is 90 minutes north. The Pacific Coast is 2 hours west. The Cascade Range is immediately east, and the Rogue River flows through the valley floor. The reason Medford earns the top spot is the comparison it makes possible with Lisbon. The European city most Americans reference when they talk about moving abroad for affordability and climate. Lisbon's monthly costs have risen significantly. Central apartments now run 1,300 to 1,500 euros. The weather is similar: dry, sunny, warm summers, mild winters. And Lisbon genuinely deserves its reputation. But Medford runs at a lower monthly cost, in your own currency, with your existing healthcare coverage and financial accounts intact. You do not have to leave the country to find what Lisbon is offering. That's the case this entire list has been making, and Medford makes it most completely. The trade-off is that wildfire smoke affects the valley in late summer, sometimes significantly. And Medford is small, around 80,000 people, without a major airport hub. But for Americans who have been doing the math on Europe and wondering if the leap is worth it, Medford closes that argument without requiring a passport. Living abroad used to require a certain kind of courage, and it still does. But the reason so many Americans are researching Portugal, Spain, and Italy right now is mostly financial. And the financial math turns out to be more complicated than it first appears when you run it honestly against the right American cities. Not New York or San Francisco. Tulsa, Knoxville, Medford. The dollar goes further there than it does in Lisbon, and you're already home. The right city for you depends on your climate preferences, your career situation, your idea of what a weekend looks like. But the assumption that you have to leave the country to find affordability deserves a closer look. I'm curious which one surprised you most on this list, or if there's a city you think belongs here that I missed. Drop it in the comments. I read them all, and it genuinely shapes what comes next. If you found this useful, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this kind of research coming.